All right, in this video, I want to talk about the abomination of desolation. I want to talk about what it is and when it happens so that we are all on the same page. So let's do this. Starting off here in Daniel chapter 12 at verse 11. I don't know where that watermark is, so I'm going to move this. It says here, "And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days." So we see that this abomination has something to do with temple sacrifice, because the daily sacrifice is going to be stopped, and the abomination that makes desolate is set up in its place, right? This is the Antichrist trying to be like Jesus, because they had temple sacrifices in Jesus' time, but he comes, offers himself as the sacrifice, and then the veil in the temple is ripped in half, signifying it's done, right? It's finished. The sacrifices are kaput, because what they all pointed to, Jesus Christ, has already happened. So he put an end to the daily sacrifices. But the Antichrist wants to copy this, right? So he has to set things up to make it look like he's the one that's going to stop it all. So he has to get those things started up again. So we see here, when the daily sacrifice is taken away, the abomination of desolation is set up. That doesn't quite tell us what the abomination of desolation is, and it doesn't quite tell us when it happens. We just know that, hey, there's daily sacrifices, and then it is stopped by this event, right? So we got a bit of a foundation here, something to go on. But let's look at some more things that tie to this, such as in Daniel chapter 8. It says at verse 11, "Yea, he magnifieth himself even to the prince of hosts, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered." This is talking about the little horn. And it says that he goes towards the south and towards the east, right? So this is saying that from the point of view of Israel, the little horn comes from the north and the west. So from the northwest, the little horn comes. He magnifies himself to the prince of hosts, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away. This is when the abomination of desolation happens, when the daily sacrifice is taken away, like we just read in Daniel 12. And it tells us that by him the daily sacrifice is removed, right? And it's when he magnifies himself to the prince of hosts. So he's sitting there claiming to be God, God in the flesh, right? And that's when things really hit the fan, right? But like I said, a key point, northwest from Israel. And second thing is, it says the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And I've been saying this in some of my more recent prophecy videos where I talk about Daniel and Revelation and what have you, that Rome is going to be destroyed. And I think that's a big sign of the time of the Gentiles is done. The church age over. And now God is going to be dealing with Israel. So Satan is going to want to be front and center. So when his place is destroyed, Rome, that's when he's going to move things to Israel. Like I've been saying, that Israel is going to be made the head of the nations at probably this coming World War III. And by the end of it, Israel is going to be the head of the nations and also the new capital of the New World Order, and where the new Vatican is, the new unholy Roman Church, because the Jews have said we have no king but Caesar, right? So they're going to have to put up with that kind of unholy matrimony that they got there, that adultery that they have committed with God. Now they have to live with this beast. And that's why we read in Revelation about the woman riding the beast. The beast is the Gentile government. It is the revived Roman Empire. And the woman, the harlot, is Israel. So I think we see what's going on already. We see the start of this world war going on. And like I've been saying in some videos, that America is part of the revived Roman Empire. Europe is run by the Vatican. North America, run by the Vatican. Australia, the same. It's part of the whole Western system, and a good chunk of the world is rising up against that, right? And that's why we see an attack on the US dollar, the world reserve currency, and what is used for the exchange of oil. When these other countries do away with that, it's going to cause world war, because this is the only option, right? Things are going to fall apart, and nations are going to clash heads, right? We already see the start of it with Ukraine. We see, again, an escalation as what's going on with Israel. And like it says here, the little horn goes where? To the east and to the south. So we have Russia, China, the Middle Eastern nations, and Africa. That's where it's going after, right? And to conquer. And I would imagine also South America, that is south of North America there. So it would still be considered south, right? And yeah, America has been a Roman Catholic colony since the Revolutionary War, where the Catholic Church tried to take England by sending the Spanish Armada, but God destroyed the Spanish fleet in a big storm. So Satan realized he couldn't just go and forcefully conquer the Protestants, but he could get the Protestants to fight against the Protestants. So he got Protestant England to fight against Protestant America and got us to beat ourselves up. And that's partly why there's so many different Protestant denominations. It's the Catholic Church, Jesuits, dividing up the Protestants so that we're not united and that we're not looking at the true enemy, Rome. We're too busy divided and fighting amongst ourselves. And they run everything. And the world is stepping up against that. And that's why these other countries, they know who the head is. They know it's Rome, the Vatican. And they're going to destroy the place of his sanctuary. And that's why he's going to end up going to Israel. But let's continue this, because there's actually a lot of interesting things that is said about this. In Daniel 9, we have Daniel's 70 weeks. And we have Daniel's 70th week, which hasn't started yet. There's been a little cutoff here. And Daniel 27 tells us of this final week that has not happened. As it says here, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. So we see that this he, as I was talking about right before it, after the Messiah is cut off, the prince shall come and destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. Right? But before that all happens, he comes and has a covenant. Because as we see over here in Daniel 8, we're talking about this little horn. When we come down here through to verse 25, it says, and through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. This is talking about when he receives his deadly wound. And it says it's without hand. I used to think that the Antichrist was going to be taken out by a zealous Jew when he claims to be God in the temple. But now I think when he claims to be God, what Jesus said is actually going to happen, where he says he saw Satan fall as lightning. I think that this Antichrist figure, he's going to get hit by lightning when he says this. And that's when the spirit of Satan enters into him. This fella dies and comes back. But we see here it's by peace he destroys many. And that's what this covenant is, a peace, right? There's always all kinds of peace deals going on with Israel, and there's always talks about trying to make peace in the Middle East. Well, that's what this guy is going to do. With peace, he's going to destroy many. He's going to trick them, right? As it talks about the overspreading of abominations, right? So we see, again, a connection here with the abomination of desolation, because the abominations he shall make desolate. Abomination of desolation. You see the connection? I hope you do. But as it says again, he causes the sacrifice and oblation to cease. So we're narrowing things down as we see here that there's a covenant for a week. Each day in the week represents a year. So that's 7 years. So during this 7-year covenant here, he causes at some point the sacrifices to cease. And then we have the abomination that causes desolation. And the proverbial crap hits the fan, right? Now, there's a couple of passages where Jesus talks about this as well. And what's cool about this is that it's only mentioned in the Gospel of Matthew and in the Gospel of Mark. Why is that cool? Well, because the Gospel of Matthew is clearly directed to the Jews, written for the Jews. And guess what? The Jews are going to be those that go through the Great Tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble. Mark is a Gospel directed to unbelieving Gentiles. And guess what? The unbelieving Gentiles, they're going to go through this Great Tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble. So they're being warned about this. But when you come to the Gospel of Luke, it doesn't warn you about these things. Because the Gospel of Luke is written to Jew and Gentile, the church. So it doesn't warn you about those things because you're not going through them if you're a born-again Christian. And John doesn't mention it either, because John is written to those born again, part of the family of God, right? So I could get into detail about that, but it's kind of getting off subject a little bit. But it is important for this, where we realize the abomination of desolation is mentioned in these two Gospels for a reason. And the first one I have up here is Mark 13, right, verse 14, where it says, "But when ye shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let him that readeth understand. Then let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains." It's interesting that it says, "Let him that readeth understand." So at this time that this is going on, people are going to be reading this. Probably going to start reading this when the rapture happens. Matthew 24, verses 15 and 16 says, "When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains." So Jesus warns when they see this event, so we know it wasn't before him. Some people like to think that this already happened. Like they believe it happened before the time of Jesus. Yet Jesus says this is a future event. So some people think it was 70 AD when Rome destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. And you may think, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But they didn't stand there in the temple and do what Daniel said the Antichrist is going to do. Like we see here, where he magnifies himself. There wasn't anybody in the Roman Empire that went to the temple, stopped the sacrifices, and then claimed to be God. Right? It didn't say to worship him. No, they just destroyed everything. Every bit of it. And the temple obviously wasn't where they claim it is. Where they say it's at that, they call the Temple Mount, that place that was obviously a Roman fort. And they have the dome of the mosque there. That was not the place of the temple. Like Jesus said, there would be not one stone atop another. But they have there the Wailing Wall. That's just the unbelieving Jews' way of saying that Jesus was wrong. He wasn't really the Messiah. Because see, look at the stones are still standing. Well, that is actually a Roman fort. That wasn't where the temple was. You see, the temple was overlaid with gold. So when they were destroying the temple and there was fires breaking out, gold melted so that it went into the cracks of the stones beneath. So they tore up all the stones under the temple to get to all the gold. That's obviously is not what happened at that place today where they call the Wailing Wall and the Temple Mount and where the Dome of the Mosque is. That's not where it was. But anyway, but we see that, again, no one magnified themselves in 70 AD when the destroying of Jerusalem and the temple. And what's interesting here in Mark and in Matthew is what Jesus says. Verse 18 of Mark 13, Jesus says, "And pray ye that your flight be not in the winter." Your flight. That's weird. Why does he say flight? And then we see here he says the same thing at verse 20 of Matthew 24. He says, "But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day." Again, a flight. So you notice that this time of the abomination of desolation, it's in Judea, as it says, "Let them in Judea flee," right? It's not talking to the world. And here we know that it's talking to Jews because it says, hey, pray that your flight isn't on the Sabbath day because the Jews keep the Sabbath. But with Mark, who may be in the area, because it says them that be in Judea flee, it doesn't say only Jews flee. It says everybody who's going to listen, go. It doesn't say, hey, pray that your flight be not on the Sabbath day because this is not written to Jews. Another little hint to throw at you there, showing you it's not just about what is being said, but who it's being said to. But some more detail to this, when we come over here to Revelation chapter 12, there's an interesting connection here to Daniel chapter 12. And at the start of Daniel 12, here at verse 1, it's a long verse here. It says, "And at that time shall Michael stand up, that great prince which standeth for the children of thy people." So he standeth up for who? Israel. "And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book." So at this time, when the abomination is going to be happening, Michael's going to stand up. And when we're reading Revelation 12, we read that Michael stands up here in verses 7 through 12 here. But before that, we actually see the rapture. In verse 5 it says, "And she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God into his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that she should feed her there 1,260 days." Now, there's obviously a time gap here, right? Because you got the church is gone, and now the woman is being persecuted. This again showing you that the church is gone, because the woman is obviously Israel. I know people say it's Mary. Mary is the personification of Israel, but she never had to flee into the wilderness after Jesus ascended to heaven. After Jesus ascended, there was nothing about Mary having to run off into the wilderness for 3.5 years, right? So it's not referencing her, right? But we see, once it tells us this, it gives us detail, right? When we're caught up, Michael stands up for Israel, like we're told about the time of the end here in Daniel 12. So you can see the connection going on here. And Michael stands up, he fights against the dragon, and he casts him down. Now, this fight might be something that isn't just, hey, a 5-minute fight, a couple-day fight. No, this fight might be something that lasts a while. And we see this because it talks about the woman fleeing into the wilderness, right? It doesn't tell you exactly when. You know that it's after the rapture. It could be she flees right after the rapture, because some people see the rapture and they're like, hey, I've been hearing what those people were saying. They're taken. They just flee, right? And again, it's those in Judea are to flee, right? But then again, you may want to get out of big cities at this time. I don't know. You'll have to decide that on your own. I would imagine that's a good idea. But we see here, Michael fights the dragon, casts him down, and then it says, after he's cast down, he has but a short time, and the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time, from the face of the serpent. So we see here, for 3.5 years, she flees, and she flees on the wings of a great eagle. And that's why I brought up the whole point that Jesus says, hey, pray that your flight be not in the winter. So that's kind of interesting, like, that it's not in the winter. I wonder why. Maybe it's a little more difficult to get the aircraft there, flying to Petra. But the wings of the great eagle probably has something to do with America. Because I know, like I said, America is run by Rome, but there's still a lot of Protestants here, obviously, and in the military. And I know there's a lot of them that don't believe the gospel. They believe they're saved by their works, so they're not going to be raptured. And the rapture is going to wake them up. And I think they're going to end up helping these people out. And that's why it says the wings of a great eagle. It's going to be the wings of America, aircraft, helping them get out of that area because they know they're going to be attacked. And they're there for 3.5 years, right? And the serpent cast a flood after the woman. That flood can be a representation of many different nations coming after her. We already see that starting to happen now, right? And we're starting to get a timing, right? We know that from Daniel 9 that there is a covenant, a 7-year covenant. And then we see that when he's cast down, that's when the woman flees into the wilderness for 3.5 years. So you can start to narrow things down because Jesus tells them to flee when? When they see the abomination of desolation. So when Satan is cast down, you see why I think now that the Antichrist, when he claims to be God in the temple, is going to be struck by lightning. I think that is symbolizing Michael throwing down Satan. And his arrogance is just reached its height. And he's claiming to be God. Michael throws him down. It's like lightning hitting the Antichrist here on earth. He's dead, but he raises from the dead. He receives a deadly wound. But he comes back, right? And then he knows he has a short time, so he goes after the woman for 3.5 years. He breaks the covenant, as it says here, in the midst of the week, right? In the midst of it, in the middle of it. And here, 3.5 years, that's what's left. That shows us, again, in the middle of the week, that's when these things are going to happen. But we also have another witness to that, is the chapter right before it, Revelation 11. It says that there's 2 witnesses. Right here. Let me start at verse 2. And let's come down here. Verse 11 here. All right, so it says here, but the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and holy city shall be tread under foot 42 months. And I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days. That's 3.5 years, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees, and the 2 candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. And if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth, and devoureth their enemies. And if any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. These have power to shut up heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. This sounds like Elijah and Moses. And they return. They're the 2 witnesses, and they're obviously in Israel, as what we're going to see here. And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them, and kill them. So after 3.5 years they are killed, and their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. So you see, they're preaching in Jerusalem. And they of the people and kindreds and tongues and nations shall see their dead bodies 3 days and a half, and shall not suffer their dead bodies to be put in graves. And they that dwell upon the earth shall rejoice over them, and make merry, and shall send gifts one to another, because these 2 prophets tormented them that dwelt on the earth. And after 3 days and a half the Spirit of life from God entered into them, and they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. So we have these 2 witnesses, Elijah and Moses, and they're able to do crazy miracles. It's as if people are going to be living in some kind of Marvel DC action movie, right? That people might be interpreting these people to be hostile aliens from another world, right? They don't see them as prophets of God, but as an invading extraterrestrial group. And when they die, they're happy about it. And when they die, it seems as though it's 3.5 years into this covenant here. So 3.5 years in, we got this going. The Antichrist claiming to be God in the temple. He is struck down. He comes back. When he raises from the dead, he kills these two witnesses, right? And it makes it seem as though, oh, he's the one saving the world, right? He's the savior. He's saving us from these hostile aliens that have been tormenting them, right? But then after 3.5 days, the bodies of Moses and Elijah rise from the dead, and they ascend up to heaven. Because they hear a great voice saying, "Come up hither," just like John heard in Revelation chapter 4, symbolizing the rapture of the church. So they see this, and then the people are probably thinking, hey, they're going to come back. Maybe they're going to come back with their forces. And in a sense, that's what's going to happen. Jesus is going to come back with all of us, his people, his Christians, his angels. And we're going to come back to defend Israel and to establish Jesus' kingdom here on earth. But the people are going to fight against that. Satan is going to deceive them. Like you said, he's claiming to be God, and when he raises from the dead and then kills the two witnesses, that's what people start to believe. And they're probably really quick to take the mark of the beast, because this mark of the beast that they're going to be given out is going to be something that changes them genetically and connects them to technology, because it's going to give them the blood of the fallen angels, probably the blood of Lucifer himself, changing their genetics, where they seem to be quote-unquote superhuman, right? A mutant, and also nanobot technology to connect them to the hive mind of the internet. And they're going to basically be Satan's little super soldiers to fight against God, because the Christians, those of us that are taken, we're going to be given a glorified body, that if we fall upon the sword, we're still going to be unharmed and just get right up. So he's trying to make his own army similar, where if they fall upon the sword, they too can get up, and the nanobots can put it back together, right? So, yeah, I know this may sound crazy to a lot of you, but I tell you before it happens, so when it happens, you'll remember that, hey, that weird guy on the internet, he said these things that sounded like crazy talk, super crazy talk, but it's happening. And you'll believe, because if you take that mark so that you changed, so that you can buy and sell, you're damning your soul. You have to not take that so that you can be saved. At this time, whoever will seek to save their life will lose it, and whoever will lose it for Jesus' sake and the gospel's sake will save it onto eternal life. So you have to be willing to starve, suffer, and ultimately die, if need be, to save your soul. Because if you give in to this, you are damned with no hope. So, with that being said, coming back over here to Revelation 12, we see how there's right here at verse 6, right after it mentions the rapture, it says that he goes after the woman, right? Well, he's not going to go after the woman with a flood yet. You see, I believe right here when he's going after the woman, that is right here, where it talks about the first seal being opened. And it says, And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. You see, a bow represents not just a bow and arrow or a staff, but a covenant, like the rainbow in the heavens represented the covenant between God and everything living on the earth, that he wasn't going to destroy it again with a flood of water. Right? So, when we read in Revelation 4 about the rapture, Revelation 5 about the Christians redeemed by the blood of Jesus Christ from all the nations and tongues, worshiping God, praising him, being worthy to open up the seals, that's when we see the first seal opened. The church is already gone. The Antichrist is revealing himself here, and he establishes a covenant, right? He's trying to make a peace deal, but like he is mentioned doing here in Daniel 12:20, not 12, Daniel 8:25 here. By peace he shall destroy many. So you see, that's how he first gets them, right? Putting their guard down with this bow. And when it says going forth to conquer and to conquer, well, what is he doing? Well, just like it was saying here in Daniel 8. And it says, And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south and toward the east and toward the present land. So you see, with this covenant, he's probably making a deal to fight off the enemies of Israel, to bring some peace. And you notice that it says here in verse 10, And it waxed great, this little horn, even to the host of heaven. And it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. You see, this is exactly what's going on in Revelation chapter 12. It tells us right here, there's a great red dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns. And it says here, And his tail drew a third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And as it says again down here, in verse 9, And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So you see this little horn waxing great, even causing the host of heaven to be cast down, and the stars to the ground. So you see how all of this is connecting? That this little horn rising up and eventually causing the daily sacrifice to be stopped and claiming to be God in the temple. Same time, there's war in heaven. Satan is cast down. The woman has to flee into the wilderness for 3.5 years. I hope all these things, you can see how they come together. It just, the picture being painted right before your eyes, right? So, excuse me. To recap, we have the little horn from the northwest of Israel making a covenant with Israel once the rapture has happened. And of course, they're going to want to make this covenant because look at all the enemies coming against her. And she's not going to be relying on God. Israel's going to be relying on her own might, realizing she doesn't have the manpower to fight back. She can fight back, but I mean, man to man, eventually you're going to be taken out. So they make that deal. And the little horn comes to the east, to the south, and to the present land to fight for Israel and Rome will be destroyed, and they move their sanctuary to Jerusalem. And then, 3.5 years later, this Antichrist fella, whoever he may be, some kind of Pope of Rome, Pontifex Maximus, is going to claim to be God in the temple, where he's going to be struck down without hands by God himself, probably physically seen as lightning. That's going to be probably when Michael has cast down Satan from the heavens, the spiritual world that you can't see. And as Jesus said, he saw and beheld Satan fall as lightning. So that's probably what we're going to see. And at that time, when the covenant's going on, the two witnesses will have been preaching in Jerusalem, in Israel. When the Antichrist comes back from the dead, he's going to use that to prove that he is God, and he's going to kill the two witnesses that have been tormenting the people. And that's going to make it look like he is God and that he has the power to fend off these supposed invading aliens, which is just a trick of the devil to get you to fight against God himself. Jesus is going to return, and Satan is trying to make you think that he is an invading alien army and trying to get you to fight against him. And that is one of the great deceptions that's going to come upon the earth here shortly. And at that point, he turns on the Jews. After he claimed to be God, he raises from the dead. He knows he has a short time. So he's like, you know what? Jesus is going to come back to defend his people, to establish his kingdom. And his mindset is like, he's not going to have anybody here. Like Jesus says in Matthew 24 and Mark 13, if he didn't return, there wouldn't be any flesh saved. Not the salvation of the souls of men from hell, but flesh here on the earth. There wouldn't be any people on the earth. Not that there wouldn't be any souls or spirits. There wouldn't be any men and women like you and I in the flesh. So he has to come back to save what's left, the remnant, right? Because Satan's just going to kill everybody. And at this time, by the end of this 3.5 years, the second 3.5 years, there's going to be a lot of starvation, all kinds of problems going on, and there's going to be a 200 million man army coming from the east, mostly made up of probably the Chinese, because they're going to want food. It's also going to probably have a lot of the Muslims and other groups, and they're going to march towards Israel. And when they get to the valley of Megiddo, Jesus is going to return with the Christians, his angels, and destroy them. Land on the Mount of Olives. It's going to split, and then he eventually is going to come into Jerusalem from the east, through the east gate, and establish the millennial kingdom, where he'll reign as king from Jerusalem over the whole world. And yeah, that recaps the whole thing there. So, with all that being said, thanks for watching. Take care. Alright, here's the 3 verses that I like to put in all the videos here. Isaiah 34:16, seek ye out the book of the Lord and read, so that Jesus doesn't tell you what he tells the Sadducees here in Matthew 22:29, ye do err, not knowing the scriptures. It's not that you err in error because you don't know the one true church that happens to be your denomination, or that you don't know the fundamental beliefs, or the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, or whatever creed, or that you don't know the magisterium or the clergy, or you don't know your favorite pastor or priest. That's why you're in error. No, you're in error because you don't know the scriptures. You need the scriptures to test to see whether or not those are correct, whether those are the right traditions, whether those are legitimate clergy, whether that church is actually following God, and whether those creeds line up. Those fundamental beliefs are found in the scriptures. Because knowing the scriptures is knowing God. Like we read here in John 17:3, Jesus says, "And this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent." This is a deep knowing. As Adam knew Eve and she conceived, you need to know God in like manner, so that you may be born again, that his word, his seed, abides in your heart, where you truly believe that Jesus Christ is God in the flesh, that he died in your place and gives you his life in exchange, so that your righteousness, your good and your bad, your life, past, present, and future, died 2,000 years ago. Your life is his. He can do what he wants with it. He puts it to death, and he gives you his life in exchange, his perfect, eternal life. That's the deep knowing you need to know of God. So, there you go. Do you know him? Do you want to know him? Get to know him. Thanks again for watching. Take care.
That fella couldn't join the church. He couldn't join the church. He couldn't get baptized. He couldn't get baptized. He woke up with God. He woke up with the devil. Are you saved? Amen. So that fella didn't take the sacraments. Didn't take the sacraments. Didn't say the rosary. Didn't take the rosary. Didn't tithe. Didn't tithe. He went to heaven. He went to hell. You saved? Didn't keep the law. He didn't keep the law. He broke the commandments. He broke the commandments. He didn't keep the golden rule. He didn't keep the golden rule. He woke up in glory. He woke up in the pit. Are you saved? You're saved. If you're not saved, you're over here or you're over here. You sure ain't in the middle. He said, Lord, remember me, thou comest thy kingdom. And Jesus turned to him and said, Verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be saved. It's like that. You have been saved? If you ever saved, you were saved like that.